Thank you, Brian, and good morning. As we all know, evidence-based decision-making is not new. Whether it was to build a bridge or wage a war, decisions were often based on evidence of some sort. But the recent shift from value-based policymaking and the increased interest in evidence-based policymaking, for the most part, has been a response to the concern with the quality of decisions made in a world typified by rapid change, scarce resources, political dynamics, and public pressure. With the rise in the marketplace for ideas, think tanks and schools of public policy are becoming more dominant players in policy research and analysis. These players generate ideas, conduct research, communicate results, provide policy analysis and advice, and seek to influence the policy development environment. In my experience, this blurs the boundaries between policy research, policy advice, and advocacy. In a few minutes, we will have the pleasure of hearing Stephan Schott, our next keynote speaker, explain what evidence-based policy is, how it evolved from policy-rooted values, and what this change means for engineers, the practice of engineering, and policymaking. Stephan is a professor in the School of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton University. Since 2010, he has been the graduate supervisor for the university's new interdisciplinary master's program in sustainable energy, engineering, and policy. He teaches graduate courses in natural resource management, environmental and ecological economics, social cost-benefit analysis, energy economics, and economic theory. His current research focuses on hydropower and ecosystem analysis, energy strategies and carbon emission reduction programs, air pollution models, sustainable development in the Arctic, and behavioral experiments in common pool resource environments. Stephan has nearly 24 papers and projects underway on such topics as carbon pricing options for Canada, sustainable development and capabilities for the polar region, and national energy strategies of major industrialized countries. He is a member of a number of organizations, including the Ontario Sustainable Energy Policy Network, the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, and the International Arctic Social Sciences Association. Stephan has a Bachelor of Social Science from the University of Ottawa and a Master's in Economics and a PhD in Natural Resource and Environmental Economics, both from the University of Guelph. Please join me in welcoming Stephan.
Thank you. Thank you for your very nice, kind remarks, introductory remarks, and thanks for inviting me to this really interesting conference. I'm glad. I'd like to applaud you for organizing this the 6th year in a row, because I do think we need more events like this. As you know from the introduction, this is close to my heart since we started a new project at Carleton University together with the Faculty of Engineering and our small School of Public Policy and Administration. So small and big partner, but very exciting time because it, I think, fits into the topic of the conference of how do engineers get involved in policy and how do policymakers understand engineering better. So those are two very important things of my talk. So as you heard, I just want to talk to you why am I here? What's my involvement with engineering? I'm an economist by training, who has been in a policy school for 13 years now, and so I'm kind of a middleman, if you like, between engineering and policy, being an economist. So I understand kind of both worlds at this point, and we've started this new program in 2010. With the Faculty of Engineering and Sustainable Energy, Engineering and Policy. And it's been a very interesting road. We are getting more and more student interest, and it's something that is working quite well for us. Although also, I've been involved in a number of projects with engineers, which really helps also for me to guide the program on the policy side. One of them is a project with Brian Carney from University of Toronto, Engineering, We've worked together on Niagara Falls, our Balancing the Natural Beauty project that I will talk a little bit about today. Also, I've been involved in one of the first joint co-supervisions at the university, at Carleton University, with environmental and civil engineering, where we have written a number of papers on air quality modeling and emissions trading in the United States. And that's together with Morteza Mesbah, who's graduating in June from the program and working now for the government, federal government, and Amir Haqqani, who's a professor in environmental engineering at Carleton University. So here, I just want to show you a quick picture of, this is one of our field trips with our students in sustainable energy policy. That's a nice thing that we actually go in the field, look at, this is the sewage treatment plant in Ottawa, where they also generate biogas. To get the students out, to get policy students together with engineering students on these field trips so that they can see the issues firsthand and then discuss not just the technology, but we're also going, for example, to wind power installation in Wolf Island and talk to communities and understand what are barriers to technology adoption, resistance to wind power, for example, in Ontario, so to understand better what the issues are. Okay, so to start my talk and to look at engineering and policy making, I went back to the National Academy of Sciences that many of you probably remember from 1997, where they made some principles and statements for preparing for the 21st century. And I think these principles are really important for engineers to keep in mind. They were to better assess, manage, and communicate risks, to use science to strengthen environmental policy, develop better scientific and technical understanding for policy making, setting appropriate goals and priorities for environmental cleanup initiatives, pricing goods and services to reflect total societal costs, including environmental consequences, using adaptive management to promote effective interaction between managers and scientists, and to move towards a sustainable relationship with the natural world. So those were big principles, and 17 years have passed, and the question is, where have we gone from there? So the reality, and of course this is a bit simplified, this is just in a nutshell where we have moved in some of these directions. The communication of risk is mostly done by politicians, public managers, and political scientists. Evidence-based policy that we've talked about is based on science. It's currently not really the flavor of the day, especially not in many government departments. Scientific and technical understanding for policymaking needs to be far better communicated and interpreted by engineers. Setting appropriate goals and priorities for environmental cleanup initiatives is often political. They are set from a political point of view. And we'll come to that later on too when we talk about air quality modeling. Pricing of goods and services to reflect total societal costs. This is done by economists often, but sometimes with limited knowledge of technological options and chemical reaction processes. I myself have to say that until I got into some of the air quality modeling work with civil engineers and environmental engineers, I didn't know all these specifics that are actually quite important for policy making, and I will come to an example later on. Adaptive management is rarely considered. Mostly we deal in policy making with ex-ante analysis to choose the best policy instruments and goals. But once the policy is in place, we rarely do ex-post analysis to see what has it actually done. Is it the right policy? Because it's also it's a competition for scarce funds, and it's always easier to justify ex-ante analysis to say, hey, we really need to know what's the best option, what's the best policy instrument, rather than learning, have we actually achieved what we tried to achieve? And a sustainable relationship with the natural world is questionable that we achieve it, and needs to be properly defined. So let me come to two cases I want to talk to you today about where I've been involved with engineers. The first one is air quality control, mostly in the US, but the models that we've worked on also have implications for any kind of emissions trading plan or even taxations in many jurisdictions. We focus on the United States because they were one of the first jurisdictions to experiment with SO2 and NOx emissions trading systems, and quite successfully so. They started in the early 1990s. Air pollution, as you know, is a major concern. We had, of course, the smog days in Toronto a while ago that led to a lot of pressure on phasing out coal power plants, and we see this happening this year, finally. The World Health Organization announced that air pollution, both indoor and outdoors, contributed to around 7 million deaths worldwide in 2012. So it's really important to make headway in this area. And in the one way to do this, of course, to start with this, is always look at the most efficient way to reduce emissions. And instead of regulating every power plant in the same way, the US decided to introduce a cap-and-trade system with tradable emissions quotas that were allocated to participants, mostly power utility plants, but also other industry. And the objective there was really to minimize total abatement costs through the market. So the focus was on abatement for individual power plants, and some were older, some different technologies, so it was more expensive for some to reduce emissions than others, and this plan helped to reduce NOx emissions at the lowest cost. However, under that system, under the current cap-and-trade systems, all emissions are equal, one-to-one trading. So what the program didn't recognize or didn't model was that NOx contributes to smog in different ways, depending on the location of power plants, depending on local meteorological conditions, volatile organic compounds, etc. So, so there are significant temporal or spatial differences in ozone formation potentials of NOx emissions, and so this gives us an idea of areas in the northeastern United States, not just northeastern, also southeastern, where you see 60% reductions in NOx in 2007 compared to 2000. The yellow areas are the ones that improved to below the national ambient air quality standards that are imposed by EPA. The green areas show some improvements. Blue areas show no change, and red areas show that actually ambient air qualities NOx emissions are increasing. So there is quite a spatial difference, and there's still a lot of room to move to actually improve conditions on the ground, which means reduction of smog levels. So what we've done, or in cooperation with the engineers at Carleton University, we tracked back local mortality or ozone concentration back to the source of power plants, and to see what impact do they have on specific locations. And then looked at mortality in local areas, how smog increased mortality at the margin. And from this, we get a number of insights for actually the potential reform of the emissions trading system. This is, of course, an illustration for 1 year, for one ozone season. It's more work has to be done. We can't. One has to be careful to say, yeah, look, our results show this is how we should change this. But our results definitely show that we need to revise the system. We need to reconsider the system. And before we extend it, for example, to Canadian jurisdictions, we can learn from these insights. So the first thing is, as I said before, every emission from every utility plant is treated as a one-for-one emissions. What could be introduced in this trade system is an exchange rate, where we really take account of the impact of a power plant on smog levels in different locations. Then then they couldn't trade one for one, but there's an exchange rate. So you basically have to pay a premium if you have more impact on smog, or vice versa. And also, that such reform results in significant benefits. We calculate the benefits with little extra costs. The marginal damage information from NOx can be used to set emission fees or total caps. The net benefit of such policy is significantly larger than that of the exchange rate policy even. So in other words, the US system focused a bit too much on efficiency of reduction of emissions rather than on looking on the health side or the marginal damage side. If we let the marginal damage side dictate the policies, it would have an even bigger impact. So that's another insight we got from our study. We also saw that temporal and spatial policies have a similar performance. However, temporal policies may be easier to implement. So here we're looking at a very practical thing. We could regulate spatially, but that is a little bit tricky and might be politically more difficult, because then we would have to discriminate by location, and certain states would say, this is not fair. We have to pay more now for trading emissions. So instead, one could also introduce a temporal policy where we would charge emissions by time of day, because it turns out that the marginal damages increase from morning to noon, when the highest damages occur in most locations, and reach a minimum in the evening. This is very interesting because in the evenings also when we have peak demand, but the health damages are the lowest from ozone emission, from NOx emissions. So this is an interesting insight, and temporal regulation, of course, would be 24 hours a day. It's a bit easier than doing it by space for all these different locations. So that's something to consider, even when you have the solutions. What is most practical and politically feasible solution? Also interesting, ozone-based NOx marginal damages increase when emissions are reduced. This is a very unconventional behavior that has not been acknowledged or examined in the environmental economics literature. So because of photochemical reactions, actually, in most cases, yes, NOx emissions are bad for health and smog, but actually the additional damages are higher at lower emissions than at higher emissions. As the emissions get higher, the photochemical reactions actually show that the additional damages are reduced, and that has implications on our typical optimal policy rule. And I couldn't avoid but showing on an economic graph here, which is normally how we determine our optimal cap or emissions level. You have this marginal abatement cost curve that is downward sloping, as you can see there. So in other words, saying, can I see this? Is this? Oh, no, go back. Oh, yeah. So normally, the first emissions to reduce are not so expensive. You can introduce filters, small changes to your production process, but as you go to lower and lower emissions, become increasingly expensive. With on the damage side, on the health side, we think that the first emissions are not as detrimental. Small amounts of emissions not so bad normally, but as we increase emissions, the damages are getting higher and higher. Now, what our research has shown, though, that in our case, our results show that we actually have a negatively sloped marginal damage curve. So, which means you will have a very different policy outcome or different target to shoot for. In this case, our optimal level is far further, much more emissions reduction than what we would think under conventional assumptions about the slope of these curves. So those are some of the impacts. There's a lot of work behind the scene there, but I want to summarize some of these impacts. and how cooperation between engineers and policy side can really understand these issues better, and would have could have some really important recommendations for reform of emissions trading systems. The EPA invited us several times, and we consistently present at their meetings in the US. Some, of course, future applications, I will not spend much time on this, is we can do this for PM-based NOx, a hypothetical Canada-US exchange rates-based system could be developed, and of course, important applications to the Chinese air quality problems. As you know, the Prime Minister in March, Li Keqiang, announced that China would declare war against pollution. There, only 3 of those 74 Chinese cities monitored by the government managed to meet official minimum standards for air quality last year. 71 didn't. So this is a major apocalypse, as they refer to it now, that is, I think, 4th largest reason of death there, and it's taken very seriously. And I think our work could have really an impact there, especially if you want to try to find the least cost solution to fighting air quality problems. Anyways, I'm gonna. So lessons are that interdisciplinary engineering research challenges current market-based approaches to air quality regulation, and engineers can have an important impact on policy reforms, specifically the choice and design of instruments. What we can learn from this is that in order to choose or advise about the right policies, we need to understand the political feasibility and the policy process, how to adjust existing economic models, how to communicate the results to policymakers, and we're trying to encourage our students to publish both in engineering journals and also in policy and economics journals. Not so easy, of course, to break this disciplinary divide. And not to think of the policy reform process as a once and for all change, but a sequence of experimental, incremental policy adjustments. And that's a very important point, because we don't think about policy as much anymore of once for all policy cut in stone, but we need to learn from it and set it up as an incremental, experimental policy adjustment process. Right. So, Niagara Falls, my second case, is, of course, close to many people's hearts. You all have been there. Everyone has heard about the tunnel project. And here, engineering is very influential in establishing state-of-the-art hydropower facilities, as we know. There are unique water diversion projects, and engineering also, interestingly, designed a new perception of beauty. Scenic beauty is a new concept, replacing natural beauty. So I have to spend a few minutes here on the history of Niagara Falls. Especially, I'm going to start in 1909. I could start earlier. But what we've looked first at, Brian Carney and me, is really saying, well, okay, how did Niagara Falls develop, and how did we come up with the regulations and the rules of water flow over the Niagara Falls? It comes back to 1909, when an agreement was needed to establish the diversion of water by Canada and the US. This really agreement came to encompass all the boundary waters between the two countries, led to the creation of the International Joint Commission. And the original agreement in 1909 specified a daily diversion rate of 20,000 cubic feet per second for the American side and 36,000 cubic feet per second for the Canadian side. There are around, Niagara Falls, on average, generally speaking, has 200,000 cubic feet per second coming over Niagara Falls at a given point. So here they agreed to divert a specific amount of water for power generation. And then, as we know, 1924, here's the Queenston Chippewa power plant, now Sir Adam Beck 1, a picture from the United States. In the 20s, a lot of activities happening, and we needed the Convention and Protocol for the Preservation of Niagara, 1929. This is a very important time that really formed our current regulation and rules for using water at Niagara Falls. It all goes back to 1929. To the construction of remedial works to ensure an unbroken crest line over the American and Horseshoe Falls. Niagara Falls did not have this unbroken horseshoe form, if you like. It was very much like Bridal Veil Falls. Lots of water here, nothing in the middle. But now we created this enhancement of scenic beauty, this creation of this unbroken crest lines. And the agreement allowed an experimental diversion of an additional 10,000 cubic feet by both sides, lasting for a period of 7 years. So here in the 20s, they were talking a lot about experiments, remedial work, seeing how we can influence the water flow, seeing how it would affect the beauty of Niagara Falls. And in these documents, they're very fascinating. We had to study them. They talked about more experiments to be done in the future. Additional water diversion was only to be allowed between October and March. So here they already defined what tourist season was, because they didn't want to interfere with the annual migrations to Niagara Falls to look at the falls. Here's some pictures from back then where we already see the control station there above the falls. And then in 1950, of course, the Niagara Diversion Treaty, which really set the tone for what we're doing right now and our constraints for the use of the tunnel. So surging demand for electricity after World War II in Ontario motivated a new treaty to be drafted within 3 months, very quickly. We studied some of the diplomatic exchanges between the US and Canada. There was really a rush into this. There was no time for experiments. So they placed importance on maintaining the scenic value of Niagara Falls, not natural beauty, but the scenic beauty. And instead of specifying the amount of water allowed for diversion, now the treaty imposed minimum scenic flow requirements. So the first time they went away from how much water can we divert for power, but what are the minimum scenic flow requirements going over Niagara Falls? And the specifications were 100,000 cubic feet during tourist season. So that's half the natural flow and a quarter of the flow all at other times. So what motivated the US and Canada to agree on these figures? That's what we wanted to know. The restrictions were based on studies conducted in the 1920s by the Special International Niagara Control Board. But even these early studies pointed out that there is a difference between actual flow volume and the impression of volume. And the impression of volume could be achieved at lower flow rates through construction of remedial works. So they based this on some evidence in the 1929 document that says that 100,000 cubic feet was enough to preserve the impression of volume. But the same study suggested that further remedial works could achieve the impression of volume at even smaller flow rates and recommended further experimentation, but there was no time for that to sign the treaty. So then we had Sir Adam Beck II, which required digging 2 tunnels to allow for additional water diversion. It was opened in 1954. Here is a picture of Sir Adam Beck II that, of course, has quite a large capacity. And so with the construction of new remedial works in the 1950s, an uninterrupted crest line could now be achieved at 50,000 cubic feet. So if you see that in non-tourist season or at night, there's still an uninterrupted crest line because of the engineering that was done. Experiments done in the 60s also suggested that the impression of volume, defined as necessary for scenic beauty, could be achieved with a flow rate as low as 60,000. Here, as you know, and you've heard this, you have seen it maybe I think 2 years ago when you had a presentation on the tunnel. This is the third tunnel that increases the intake capacity by 25%. It goes around 10 kilometers long below the city of Niagara Falls. That was, of course, completed last year. And interesting enough, now we have enough diversion capacity on both sides to theoretically completely dry out the falls if we want it. If we want to use all the water for power production, we have enough to not show the falls at all if we want it. So the question then is, what's the relevance of the treaty today? with the new tunnel, we spent $1.6 billion. It expired in 2000. It was a 50-year treaty. Nobody's touching it. But since 1950, lots has changed. The Green Energy Act of 2009 has an increasing portfolio of intermittent sources that need to be backed up with reliable hydropower. Ontario now demand peaks in the summer, not winter anymore, so it is not so compatible with these tourist restrictions. Climate change is a major concern, so we need as much clean power as possible. New remedial works are in place that were done after the treaty. An increase of intake capacity by 25% since March 2013 due to new tunnel project. We know more about erosion and recession of the falls. That is estimated at 1 to 1.5 meters per year. And there's a new era of tourism. According to the Niagara Parks Commission that we interviewed, people want to increasingly stay in falls view rooms on the hill by the casino overlooking the falls. And the problem with that is since they built those hotels up there, as you can see here, we see a phenomenon like the mist plume that tripled annually, according to some studies by the Niagara Parks Commission. So, and the question is, why did these misty days triple? So we're looking into that right now, Brian Carney and some of his students. The Niagara Parks Commission hired wind tunnel expert, and they showed that the building of the hotels created that phenomenon. And then the hotels hired their volcano expert that showed that's not true. So it's an ongoing discussion. But misty days in '96 were 29, now they're 68. So the question is really, is there a more optimal flow rate that expands hydrogeneration and still maintains scenic beauty and deals with all these other issues? Is the definition of scenic beauty universal? Does it require an exact flow rate of 100,000 cubic feet on all days during the tourist season? Why keep beauty linked with a specific flow rate? Of course, I can't hesitate to show some of our results from our paper that was just published in March in Energy Policy, which puts a figure on these issues. The 500 roughly megawatts that we are losing out on because of the treaty translates to between 100 to 870 million dollars per year if you replace this with rooftop mounted solar panels through the old feed-in tariff rate, so that at a maximum. But at Ontario monthly average price about $103 million. So it's not trivial that we ignore this treaty. All right, I'm almost out of time here, so I'm going to wrap this up to leave some room for questions. What we can learn from Niagara Falls is that engineering has played an unconventional role in balancing the optimization of energy with notions of scenic beauty. This is, however, currently being increasingly challenged in the US, where they're returning to natural aesthetics and consequent dam removal. A lot of dams are removed in the US, and it's going back to, there are studies on how tourists value looking at and traveling to these waterfalls. In Ontario, there is a need for green power and recent investment of $1.6 billion to a new water diversion tunnel, so the situation is different. Engineering can contribute by better optimization of the grid in connection with best use of water flow in Niagara River. This will also require consideration of those economic and ecological value of water flow by season and time of day. So we need more surveys, we need choice experience with tourists, we need to understand better how flow affects the scenic view and the decisions of people to go there. We need to estimate the misting plume effect, new storage solutions, new treaty negotiations. So just to sum up, on these two cases that I've been involved in, and I think that illustrates a bit how engineering can be really powerful when they look at the specifics of policy, rules and decisions, legal arrangements. To summarize this from these two studies, what point I want to make for the future of decision making and the role of engineering is that incremental decision making with ex post analysis and continuous adjustment of policy goals and targets is really important. And truly integrated interdisciplinary approaches are more powerful. It will require co-supervision, as we've done in the case of air quality modeling, and engagement and strong will of individuals from many disciplines to collaborate. There has to be strong will, because it's not easy to do this interdisciplinary work. It takes time. You need to learn a lot from each other. You have to have a lot of patience. But there's also endogenous preference formation at the local level that has to be taken into consideration for engineering solutions. And so engineering, I think, can play a central role in this more integrated incremental policy learning process by providing innovative, not necessary technological solutions under existing constraints. But it also needs to challenge existing constraints, like the Niagara River Water Diversion Treaty, and indicate sustainable, cost-efficient, and sensible policy path. This might require more interdisciplinary work, better communication to the public and policymakers. But through this process, I think it also would transfer knowledge and would develop better scientific and technical understanding for policymakers. So it's not just how do we get our message across, but we're educating policymakers at the same time to become more sensitive and learn about engineering insights. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
We do have time for some questions. I think we've covered a couple of interesting topics. Catherine's got the mic. Hands up for a question.
Hi, I'm Mike Mastro-Matteo. I'm with Engineering Dimensions. You mentioned you worked with Brian Carney at the U of T a couple of times. And I've spoken to him too, and I remember one of his points was that engineers need to tell, in his words, better stories. And I'm wondering if that's the case, it's just a matter of engineers being more clear with what they have to say, and that might in turn lead to them making a stronger contribution in policy development. If they can make technical things a bit more acceptable to the general public or general reader.
Yeah, I agree full-heartedly. I think that's a good point, and that's why also we decide to send papers that are even technical sometimes to energy policy, and transferring them into a way that economists or policymakers can understand, where you can deal with lots of information. For example, in that paper is in the appendix, very technical information on how water flow translates into energy generation, and what constraints are, and so on, and dealing a bit with the transmission side without boring the audience in a sense, because they don't want to necessarily go into all those details. And then it can be very powerful, but it's also dangerous for people that don't have the engineering understanding to write on this on their own. For example, the comment from the referees for that article were, you didn't really deal with the transmission constraints in Niagara and so on. So it forced us, or me, to really understand that better and communicate that to satisfy the referees. So I think it's very important, and I know Brian does a lot of policy papers and public sector digest publication, policy option publications. Those are really powerful. They're read by far more people than in our peer-reviewed journal articles that give so much credit to professors. But I think this is really important that engineers start writing that too.
Johnny Zucon from Professional Engineers Ontario. Just a question, since you're in the academia, what are you noticing are the strengths and weaknesses of the engineering minds that you're dealing with? As you say, you're trying to create synergies between those who have an engineering background and policy background, in your case, economy. Yeah. So what are you seeing the strengths and weaknesses from those kind of minds?
That's a good question. I can see it from our program a lot. We have some engineering students who even have a master's in engineering, then take a master's in public policy and an MA in sustainable energy policy. And many of them are first overwhelmed by the amount of readings that especially my political science colleagues give them. They get introduced to the major policy debate, all the policy reports, the policy literature, and it's an overwhelming amount of reading. I can relate to it a bit from economics, because we study models very specifically, and you have a 20-page in-depth article that you read over 2 or 3 times. And so the engineers first go in this with that kind of attitude, but they soon find out they can't do 1/4 of the work. So that's one problem. The other problem is actually a reluctance to get involved in discussions and debates in the classroom, for example. The policy students get right in there, even if they might not probably know what they're saying. They get in there and they always have an opinion, and if nobody challenges it, that will go through. And I think that's what happens a little bit in real life. On the other hand, what I like is that they are not afraid of modeling. They're not afraid of the math behind. You won't believe how many policy students are really have a phobia of math. And so this is the 2 things that we need to teach both sides. What is really neat is when they work on case studies together, when you team policy students and engineering students up together.
My name is Ishwar. I'm a counselor with PEO. My question is on the boundaries, international boundaries. You mentioned about China. They're having this air quality problems in a lot of major cities. Yeah. And the air flows across the boundaries, right? So the units, the air quality units, water standards, I know in Europe, for example, drinking water standards are very different than Canadian standards.
Yes.
Fecal coliform, fecal streptor. So is there any will by the academia at your level to make uniform standards across the different nations, so that when there's a mobility of engineers, which Engineers Canada is working hard, it makes it user-friendly. So if I take a flight to LA, I'm sitting with my American colleague, we're talking the same language. Same a guy from India or China, we can transmit two-way communication in a user-friendly way. So I just wonder, when I came to this country 43 years ago, we had FBS system, we went to metric, and still we are not metric. I was coming on Bay Street, and there's a degree Fahrenheit. I mean, it's an international city. Good to have both units. So I think sometimes, we have big manuals in metric. We don't follow them. And that is creating a lot of problem among international students. Yeah. They don't feel at ease, and I want you to comment on that.
Yeah, and this is a good point, and you're absolutely right with your observation that the thresholds are different, especially between Canada and the US. Provinces have different thresholds, even within Canada. It's very surprising to me, especially when it comes to health impacts, like from air quality. There should be more unique standards, and many of my colleagues work more on that on the health side, health economists and health scientists, to say this is really what is an acceptable standard or not. But then often politics comes into the play and say we cannot handle that yet at this point. You're right. But in China, for example, right now, that would mean a significant reduction in growth and a significant impact to their economy, and you can transition definitely to more universally acceptable and standardized standards and thresholds. What I would say for China is, let's get there the quickest possible way, which means we need to look at cost-efficient, effective policies. Not just cost-efficient, as in the US example, for example, but also effective, in effectively reducing ozone, for example, and looking at conditions in different locations. And that can really buy you a lot of cost reductions in achieving much better progress.
I guess we've got time for one more.
Just revisiting the question on the agenda, what constitutes evidence in the eyes of the government and regulators? Can you briefly revisit that in light of the engineer's dilemma in terms of whether to address public interest or whether to address the political agenda when those two are not 100% aligned?
That's a good question. I don't think, yeah, public interest is, I think, a dangerous route to go. I think the evidence is there often, but it's a way of selling the evidence. Not saying, listen, we have the solution, listen to us. Like in our case here, we're not saying we now know how to reform the US emissions trading system. We just know there are definite flaws. We have shown, illustrated that it could make a big difference if you move to a different target and way of doing this. And so let's cooperate on that, experiment on a small scale, and see what impact this has. And then it can turn into a larger policy process. So I think the important not to come to the table saying, listen, we have it all figured out, but to convince policymakers that we have a really good model, we have really good information, and you should care because of this. Like in Niagara Falls, there are 800 million maybe or $100 million at stake. So once you get their attention with that, speak that language, then I think the evidence makes its way in easier. I hope that answers you.